Hi, I'm Phil Lister. Welcome to the premiere of an all-new video series by Lister Model Works called Model Crafter. This is Volume 1, and we're kicking it off with Moebius Models Frankenstein. The speed at which future volumes are done depend on two things: when the kits are released and how fast I can get the videos done. Okay, are you ready? Then let's get those brushes and those paints out and get to work. First, examine the instruction sheet carefully to familiarize yourself with the kit. Remove the bags of parts and open the bag for the base parts. Do not remove any parts from the sprues yet. Beginning with the base, using a file, hobby knife, sandpaper, or emery board, file down any burrs or excess sprue material to clean up the parts. On the piece that goes behind the floor, match up the pins to the wall section. Apply some glue to the holes and glue both sections together. Do the same thing for the other wall section. Now, I'm using super glue along with accelerator, which instantly sets the bond. That makes waiting easy. Next, attach the top, and that pretty much finishes up the wall. Next, glue the door halves together. It's important to apply enough glue all around the edges for a good seal. Later on, we'll sand away the seams. Once the door is assembled, we can then sand along the edges to eliminate the seams. Next are the door handles. Remove the sprue pieces, and I also removed the little decorative rods or knobs. It was purely a matter of preference here. Sand away any seams around the handles. You can use the back side of your hobby knife for this as a scraper. Glue the handles onto the metal plates on each side of the door. As for the base, I filled in the two holes for the monster's boots. I'll explain later why I did this. The base parts are now ready for primer, then final painting. I simply dry fit the parts to make applying the primer easier. Do not glue all three sections together yet. Now it's time to begin the figure itself. Start with the boots. Cut all four boot halves from the sprues. Glue the appropriate sides together. There's a seam running along the top and back of each boot. Those seams can remain, since the actual asphalt spreader boots did have those seams. I cut the pins off the top and the bottom of each boot, and again, I'll explain more on that later. Remove the hands and the sleeve parts from the sprues.
Glue each side together. Using the back of your hobby knife, scrape the seams down. Then you can come back with some sandpaper and/or an emery board and sand the seams down even further. Using finer grades of sandpaper as you progress gives you a much smoother, polished surface. Now, there's a mistake on the left arm. The wrist and hand need to be turned slightly. Remove the pin and simply glue the wrist with it turned to where the hand will grasp the door edge. Moving on to the head, cut the parts off the sprue and then glue both halves together. Again, proceed to scrape and sand the edges as much as possible to help eliminate any seams. Cut the leg halves from the sprues. Since I removed the pins from the boots, I can go ahead and glue the legs together without worrying about fitting the boots to the legs first. Glue the legs together and again, sand to eliminate any seams. With the upper body, I'm going to go ahead and fit the sleeves, the head, and the legs to the 1/2. Note how the parts key together. Once those parts are glued in, go ahead and glue the other half on. Since I removed the pins from the boots, I can now glue those boots at a slight angle, which gives them a more natural stance to the figure as seen here. The final two parts are the coat pocket flaps. Go ahead and glue those on. I then sprayed the figure with a coat of primer and allowed that to dry for about 24 hours. Same time for the base. To begin the paint process, I first mixed some brown and black to make a dark brown. I mix that up thoroughly and then I start brushing that onto the wood floor. You want to make sure to get plenty of even coverage. Using acrylics, you can speed dry the paint with a blow dryer. Next will be to dry brush the base to bring out all that sculpted detail. I'm mixing a caramel brown for this. Remember that dry brushing is a light to dark process. By dry brushing a lighter shade over the base color, you are emphasizing the details. See how the paint just hits the ridges on this paper towel? You want just a bit of paint on the brush tips, hence the term dry brushing. Just continue that all across the entire base. Next up is the door. Again, I used a base coat of dark brown, followed by a dry brushing of a lighter brown. Look at all that sculpted in detail just crying to be brought out. Next up are the metal plates and all of the bolts. I begin with a base coat of black. followed with a mix of black and silver, making a dark metallic gray, and I dry brush that all over the metal. For the wall, I started with black, covering the entire wall. Once that is dry, I come back with a medium gray color and dry brush the wall. I then lightened up the gray with a little bit of white, and I hit just several blocks at random for some interest. The base is now done and ready to assemble. Before gluing the door to the base, I scraped some paint away from the base as the glue won't stick to the paint. I apply a drop of glue to each mounting hole and run a small bead along the scraped area. The door is then placed onto the base and some accelerator is sprayed to set the bond. After applying some glue to the pins, I attach the wall sections to the base. The final touch on the base is to paint the nail heads black. The base is now done and ready to accept the figure. Now you can paint the flesh tones any color or shade you wish. I chose to use a pale greenish gray. As many of you may know by now, I mix a lot of my own colors. All I'm doing right now is just basing everything. I'll come back and dry brush or use pastel chalks for shading. Once the flesh tones are on, I move on to the clothing, which is your run-of-the-mill garden variety black. For the eyes, I mix up a slight off-white yellowish color. Using a fine point detail brush, I block in the white for the eyes. I then paint in the pupils along with the scar, and I define the mouth with some black. After first applying black, I come back with silver over the brace on that arm, as well as the clamp on the forehead. The fingernails are then based out in black. Now, for shading, I'm using pastel chalks. These work great for shading since they emulate airbrushing. I use a small brush for applying the chalk and then come back with a clean broad brush for blending. The clothing was then dry brushed using a gray color to bring out all the details in the folds. The last thing was to paint the nameplate. I decided to paint it a metallic bronze instead of using a gradation effect. First, the nameplate is based out in dark brown. That was then followed by dry brushing with Tamiya gold.